Hello, and welcome to the Reimagining Agile webinar, brought to you by the World Management Agility Forum. My name is Jim Highsmith. As an adventurer, catalyst, and storyteller, I've journeyed through the realms of Agile software development and adaptive leadership, always aiming to bring people together to unlock new potentials. Today, we will venture beyond talking about Agile tools and frameworks. Instead, we aim to revisit the foundational principles that drove past success and will prepare us to face the challenges ahead. Some of us have started an initiative called Reimagining Agile. In this initiative and in this webinar, we explore where Agile and artificial intelligence intersect and look at what we might learn from other technology transformations. I want to take a moment to explore how important getting this AI Agile intersection right. Our challenge resonates with a quote from Mustafa Suleyman, co-founder of DeepMinds and CEO of Microsoft AI. In his recent foreignaffairs.com article, he says, "The potential positives are astonishing, including heightened business productivity, cheaper and more effective healthcare, scientific discoveries, and education programs. But the risks are also colossal. These include the proliferation of disinformation, as well as job losses, and the likelihood that bad actors will seek to use the new technology to sow havoc. Escalating technology change and the disappointments in organizational responses to past changes are well documented, particularly, for example, in the Agile community. Leaders at all levels must be more agile, innovative, and collaborative, and adaptive to improve the odds of successful transformations." It's interesting that even in all our amazing technological progress, 90% of executives still see cultural factors, particularly the human elements like agility, as the main obstacles to these transformations. Today, our panel of experts provide diverse and insightful perspectives to these discussions. Rashina Hoda, Associate Professor, Monash University and TED speaker. Chet Hendrickson, well-known software developer and pioneer of extreme programming. Angie Doyle, Director of Digital Transformation, focusing on Lean and Agile at Nike. I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves and share their unique perspectives on their Agile journey. But first, a little about the session format. Each of the panelists will provide a couple of minute introduction to themselves and their ideas. We'll follow that with a 25-minute panel discussion, and then we'll have a 6 to 10 minute Q&A from the audience. Rashina, please introduce yourself and your perspective.
Thanks, Jim. And hi, everybody. I'm Rashina Hoda. I'm an associate professor at Monash University, Melbourne, in sunny Lisbon at the moment, and very much enjoying this talk. I come to this with experience that reflects research and education. So as an academic, I have a long history with Agile. My PhD was in Agile software development. And in particular, I looked at the idea of self-organizing teams, which at that point in the early 2000s was quite a bit of a buzzword. And we weren't quite sure what it actually meant. So over the years, with my teams, my students, and my colleagues, I've been able to go into industry and look at how Agile practitioners and software practitioners have really taken what the books say, so to say, and actually adapted it to practice, and what changes they make on the go to make it happen and make it work for them. So it's always exciting for me to, witness the Agile story unfold over the last 2 decades, in terms of where it started, how it was a bit of a stranger, a new kid on the block, and to becoming really a standard way of developing software. And now we have a new kid on the block, which is also an A word, as Jim said, and what we can do with the combination of the two looking forward. So I'm really excited to talk about all of this with my lovely panelists today.
Thank you, Rashina. Chet, how about you?
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I am Chet Hendrickson. I had the great fortune to be a member of the team back at what was then Chrysler Corporation that invented extreme programming back in the mid-1990s, XP as we call it, or the only Agile method that actually works. Keep that in mind as we go forward. Has been my focus, but over the past 15 or so years, I've been embedded in the Scrum world before managing to escape about a year ago and transition into retirement. So as I just told our panelists here a few minutes ago, that I don't have anything to sell. You cannot hire me even if you want to. So be careful. Thank you.
Thanks, Chet. Yeah, I'm telling people these days that I failed retirement. But, Angie, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Angie Doyle. I'm originally from South Africa and now live in the Netherlands, just outside of Amsterdam. My journey over the past 25 years also has taken me from a business operations side into process engineering, into product management, and now to leading agile evolutions across many different sectors like banking, telecom, retail. I currently lead the Lean Agile team within the digital transformation space within Nike in the EMEA region, and that is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I'm also going to talk a little about my role that I have with the Agile Alliance. So I'm also a contributor as a board member for the Agile Alliance in my spare time. And I do a lot of volunteer work in the Agile community. It's been a big part of my Agile journey so far. So I also do a lot of work in emerging economies, really focused on bringing speakers and the Agile community to communities, underserved communities in countries like Costa Rica, South Africa, Colombia, etc. My journey has really been fueled by a passion for mentoring professional agilists and driving strategic agility within organizations. So really trying to focus on creating environments where teams and organizations can thrive through rapidly changing environments. So that's the perspective I'm going to speak to today, is more from a business adoption perspective. I'm looking forward to engaging with my panelists and with everybody joining virtually today as well. And thank you for having me.
Good. Well, I think we've got a lot of diverse opinions here, so let's get to it. Rashina, Agile values and principles emphasize human interaction, collaboration, and adaptability. From your perspective, what have been the accomplishments and disappointments of the Agile movement to date in these areas or others you may have encountered? I'm particularly interested in accomplishments and disappointments. And I use those words specifically rather than success and failure because I think they more accurately reflect what's going on.
Now, I totally agree, Jim. I think those are very wisely chosen. Looking back at the sort of 2 decades of Agile from, a research and education perspective, I'd say the biggest accomplishment of Agile has been that it has been successful at putting the people back at the heart of software engineering. Right? This is not how we used to teach software. This is now how we used to practice software or research software. It was a lot about the technical aspects, and Agile has really brought the humanity, so to say, kind of back into it, and to focus on the people of the process, whether it be the developers themselves, the customers, the stakeholders, or the end users. So ultimately, it's about the people we serve. And I think that has been a refreshing change for software engineering and has had wide scanning kind of impact across industry and academia. The disappointment, I would say, if you say so, it really is also to do with human factors. But and hear me out here. What I mean by that is when we look at Agile, the way it was set up. So in literature and in the books. Now, people who come to Agile with the right kind of mindset are able to bring human values to it, on their own. However, if we look strictly at how Agile is set up, or whether the manifesto or the principles or the Scrum or the XP literature and so on, there actually isn't a lot of human values baked into it. And what I mean by that, or rather explicitly baked into it. So what I mean by that is things like ethics. We don't really talk explicitly about ethics. We don't really explicitly talk about well-being and mental health. We don't explicitly talk about diversity and inclusion. Now, again, as I said, people who come with the right mindset, it's a no-brainer. They will bring all of these things to Agile. But as an educationalist and a researcher, when we teach it, we have to separate the fundamentals from the practice, and we say, look, fundamentally it doesn't actually talk about these things, but in practice we see it. So that, I feel, is a little bit of disappointment. But to be fair, I mean, it's been a journey of 20 years. Things have evolved a lot in the world as a whole. So it's more about evolution, I guess, than and you know, coming up to terms with what these words mean now in this modern world: ethics, mental health, and diversity.
Chet, I know that when we started off with Agile, the people side of it was really important, but I know there's a bunch of developers that think we got lost along the way.
Yeah, I was kind of taken aback by what Rashina just said. It seems like I've spent the vast majority of my time in the Agile space, certainly in the XP world, talking about those things. Now, as fundamentally a software developer, as I often tell people, I did not get into this business to hang out and talk about my feelings. But it turns out that's what good XP coaching is often about, is about how the team works together. How do we build safety? How do we build a cross-functional team with different kinds of skill sets that can actually accomplish that? I imagine that if you look at most of the literature, and you won't find those things, but it is a strong undercurrent. I mean, the basic beginning point of extreme programming, based on exactly what the inventor of extreme programming, Kent Beck, said his purpose was to make the world safe for software developers. And that's been our basic thrust since the beginning. And you have to understand what makes the world unsafe, and then realize what things are within your control to be able to create safety. If you're asking someone else to make the world safe for you, you're going to have to wait a long time. You're going to have to take control of these issues. And I think this has been one of the major thrusts, I think, really, of what the core of Agile really is. It's unfortunate that it doesn't appear that way in some places.
Angie, one of the things that I've learned from several CEO and C-level type people that I've talked to is that, you know, in a corporation, in an organization, you have to kind of balance performance and people. And the performance side is delivering, you know, in the Agile Manifesto, it's delivering software, but it really is delivering any outcome in a business environment. And then the people side, the health of the organization from a people perspective. And I know some C-level people who think that's gotten out of whack, that we've put too much emphasis on the people side and not enough on the performance side. Do you see any of that within Nike?
I mean, maybe I won't talk specifically to Nike, but I can talk about what I see in general. And it's weird. I think I see it from a slightly different perspective. I think from an Agile coaching perspective, we've certainly put a huge focus on that people dynamic side, right? So exactly what Rashina and Chet were talking about. But what I am finding within companies is that there is a lot of focus on, you know, you need to be able to demonstrate that value that you're adding, right? So we want to be able to deliver this value, but how are you demonstrating that value? And where I think things have got a little out of whack, as you were saying, is that, you know, we want to focus on this mindset, but we're also being asked to show how are you making progress. And that's a fair request, right? For any company that's investing in people to come in and change the culture, you want to know how are you making some changes. So where we've got to is we were like, okay, well, we need to demonstrate how we're adding this value. So we'll start measuring a couple of things and, you know, giving some reports and, you know, this is what we're doing. And we've started focusing so much on that process side, the metrics, the stuff that we can measure, that we've forgotten about that delivery of value side. Like how are we actually delivering value? Because it can be hard to quantify for a lot of people. And I think that's led for me to a lot of these really interesting conversations in the Agile community. We know we want to focus on that mindset that Rashina was talking about, but we are also expected to be able to demonstrate how we're doing it in an organization. So that process side has become a very interesting dynamic where I think we've got stuck a little bit, where we're struggling to lose the framework focus and that process focus, and then we'll end up just scaling and implementing more of that stuff. Yeah.
Chet, it's interesting. I became involved with XP early on. In 1999, Kent Beck and I exchanged manuscripts, and then I got invited to an XP meeting the next year. So I've been a proponent of XP for a long time, particularly the technical practices. In your view, how have the technical practices of XP and the technical practices in general held up under the landscape of changing agile development? Do you think there are any that need to be updated or let go of, or what do you see as the status of the kind of the technical side of agile development?
I think looking at the XP world as it exists today, after having gone through the hegemony of Scrum, the world of XP is completely different than it was as we wrote about it, in 1999. It has continued to evolve. There are things being done today that we could not imagine 30 years ago. You moved from pair programming to mobbing. We have more and better tools than we had back then. I think it's continuing to evolve as the software development world has evolved. We've had to struggle and learn how to do the things we have to do to provide that safety I spoke about. And one of those is ensuring that the things we build do the things that we agreed that they're supposed to do. And as we move to more complicated platforms, we've had to adapt and learn how to bring those things along with us. That desire to build things that we know work. And so I think it's continued to evolve, and I think that's one of the things that makes XP an extraordinary process, since it is essentially open sourced. Kent said, "Here's this idea, take it and use it," as opposed to approaches other inventors of process have done. And I think that makes a certain vitality to XP that perhaps you don't see unless you really dig into it.
Angie, what are you doing? You're at Nike doing in terms of digital transformation from the technical perspective as opposed from the people perspective?
Sorry,
Angie,
Jim, I just lost that question. Can you repeat it?
Yeah. What are you doing from a technical perspective in terms of agile development versus the people perspective?
So from a people perspective compared to a technical perspective, within what we're really focusing on, right? Something that we're experimenting with a little bit in my team, right? Is we're trying to get a better sense from an agile perspective, what do teams really need, right? So we're working a little closer with our engineering counterparts, getting a better sense of what people in the teams actually need compared to the team dynamic part, right? So we're all bringing a piece of a puzzle, and it's something that I think in the past we haven't been really good at, right? And I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. From an agile perspective, we've been very focused on that process side where we come in quite heavy with frameworks. And really what we're trying to do is say, let's have a look at this holistically. All of us have got a really good view on different parts of a puzzle that's really going to help a team to get to, a level of high efficiency, or that so-called high performing team. And if we really look at this problem from a holistic perspective, what are things that the teams need? What problem do they need help solving? Rather than other people coming in and saying, we think this is the problem you need to solve. I think engineering teams are getting quite tired of being told how to fix their problems. They often know what their challenges are, and they need help with the surrounding dynamics, right? And that's really what we're trying to do. We don't want to tell people how to fix their problems. We've got a view, they've got a really good sense of it, but how do we kind of co-create what that solution is going to look like with everybody in our ecosystem, right? So that's something that we're experimenting with at the moment. And certainly we've had some good results with the teams where we have been doing it, right? So we've got a couple of pilot teams, and we're looking to scale that out a little bit more.
Great.
Can I ask a follow-up there?
Sure. Go ahead, Chet.
I think the thing that popped in my head as you were talking about that is an interest in what you have learned about the things that the teams don't need, and the things that have been forced upon them in the realm of activities, processes, tools that do not make their lives any better. I have a few ideas of things that teams often are confronted with that they would be better off without, and often they're afraid to say those things.
Yeah.
Have you learned very much about what they don't want?
I think there's often conversations around there's too many meetings, we're not sure why we need this thing. And I'll be honest with you, if we're from an agile coaching perspective, if you're going into a team saying this team should be doing, more stand-ups, this team should be doing, more of this type of event, well, what does the team think? So again, I think that there's coming back to that framework conversation, if your argument behind introducing something into a team is because this framework says it should be there, then that's not a valid argument, right? Does the team need it to get them to their next level? And does the team want it, right? So there's also a lot to be said around things that we know would probably work really well in this space for a team, but is the team willing to work on that? Is it that important for them? Because it might be important for you as a coach or even as an engineering manager for a team to do something, but if it's not important for the team, you're not going to get anywhere, right? So again, it's about really figuring out what do they need, and very often they can see the benefit behind introducing some practices. But I think it's when we come in with too many things and it's too by the book, and we're not really responding to the team that's in front of us. We're responding to a particular like checklist or a playbook that we've got in our mind that's worked with other teams, and we really need to figure out what is the problem this team's trying to solve. What is the problem space that we're in? Something I've worked with, with one team may not be the best fit for this team, and really go back to that, right? So you were saying, how are you working with people? Well, we're working with people, right? People inherently probably do know the best way to figure this out, and we've just got to create the right space for them to have good conversations, to unblock it for them, right? So that they actually can use the gifts of their creativity, right? Sometimes I think we lock them in a bit, so into these frameworks and that process, and that's what we've got to shake off in the agile space.
I often, the first thing that pops into my head about things that teams would rather not have is the abomination known as Jira.
Rashina, you had a comment.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Jim. I'm just listening to Angie and Chet before about what teams want and teams need, and just coming in with a bit of research perspective here, if you like. So we did a bit of research to understand how real world Scrum differs from what it says in the book, and how teams are actually practicing things. And I'll give you the short practitioner-friendly version, which is we found people doing either things by the book, and you will not be surprised if I said there were very few who did that. And then we found people who were doing what we call standard variation, meaning the Scrum or the XP practices themselves allow to do it this way or the other way. So they're standard variations. Then there were contextual variations, in that where the guidelines are not entirely clear what to do in this situation, the teams will find their own ways of going about it and, turning things around and working through it anyway. So those were contextual variations. And then there was the final bit, which was what we call, from a research perspective, clear deviation, at which point it's no longer even Scrum or Agile or XP, and it's just a whole hot pot of, go as you, an a la carte kind of approach. And the other thing I'll highlight also that we know from research is there's many teams go through this journey where they start with by the book, they get into standard variations, they come up to contextual variation, and some of them actually cross over to the clear deviation, but most of them will sort of be where they're maturing their practice based on what is contextually required. So they make Agile their own. So I just wanted to bring in that research perspective.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Rashina, artificial intelligence continues to evolve more quickly than we ever thought possible before last year. What role do you see it playing in enhancing agility? How can agile teams best integrate AI to enhance rather than undermine agile values and principles?
No, absolutely. So two parts to that question. I think definitely agile AI has a role to play in boosting agile practices, I would say, and the productivity side of things, the performance side of things, as we were talking about before. So things where, for instance, we have researchers and my colleagues who are looking at AI and ML models, which can be applied to improve estimation practices, for instance. So you have a better handle on estimation. You have techniques that are based, again, in AI and ML to improve prioritization, or what are the best selection of tasks that will be the most optimal from a productivity perspective. But also, now here's the catch, which goes to the second part of the question, is in order not to undermine the human value side of things. It's not just a productivity, boosting exercise, the AI. You have to bring the human aspects back in there. So this is what we call the AI mind and the human heart combined together, right? And the human heart aspect is say, okay, a certain task might be good for you from the overall project perspective. It's going to get you there faster, but for that individual practitioner or developer, based on the project data that the AI knows and their profile that the AI knows, the AI, say, sort of an agile co-pilot, if you like, is what we're envisioning, might say, look, this is going to be faster, but you are near to a burnout based on all the data I've seen. So again, going back to that mental health perspective, balancing things out. So perhaps you want to not take up this task, but the other one. So this is the kind of combination that we're now playing with of the human values combined with what AI brings to the table.
Great. Chet, I know you have a little bit of a contrarian view about AI. You want to jump in here?
Well, I've been involved in software development for close to 40 years, and every decade or so, we have this burst of interest in artificial intelligence. And as we said 40 years ago, artificial intelligence is better than none at all. But how good is it? And is it really what we want? The saying that yes, that AI can help us do better at estimation, when in fact we've known in the XP world that estimation is something that's not worth doing at all for over 20 years. And so I guess anything not worth doing is not worth doing well. But one must always think about, well, are these things we should actually be doing? We see an awful lot of information regarding the tools that large language models are providing us in the help with code generation and the high probability that there will be instances of hallucination within the code generated. There's more and more instances of libraries being referenced in generated code that do not exist, which allows folks to create them for nefarious purposes. And so you have to kind of worry about all these things. I'm not worried about Skynet, but I am worried about the day-to-day things and what percentage of these large language models are being trained on intellectual property without permission. How do we ensure that what we don't create is a world where the AI writes poetry and creates art to free us up to spend more time cleaning and taking out the trash? And I think that should be something that should be reversed.
Angie, how are you all approaching the use of AI within Nike and your agile transformation?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to go a slightly different angle with the AI, right? Because within the Agile Alliance, I'm actually doing a little bit of work on the AI roadmap. And one of the things that I think is quite fascinating for me from an agile perspective with AI is what we're unlocking for business stakeholders, right? So, we focus a lot from an agile perspective. Oh, what is it going to do for us in our software development teams? But if you have a look at it from a business perspective, you're empowering business users with low code and no code tools to do a lot of things that they weren't able to do in the past. And they had to rely on software developers to build something for them. It would go into some kind of a backlog, take probably a couple of weeks or a few months to generate. And now you actually got business users that have that power at their fingertips, right? They can actually do a lot of that stuff on their own. And for me, that introduces a lot of different questions on, the use of AI and what it actually enables businesses to do. I mean, years ago in process engineering, the goal was always to empower the business to do as much as they could on their own. And we're actually getting there. And now it's going to start, the questions we have to start asking is, if business users can make all of these changes and it's so powerful, how do we then integrate that with our agile practices, right? Like, we've got a lot of things that we do where we test concepts and we make sure that they work, but our business users going to be constrained by a lot of the same things software engineers are. And how do we start combining the two? So I think it unlocks so much for us, and we've really just got to ensure that people are empowered to use it. What I see is there's a lot of companies that are limiting access to AI tools. And again, like, we're actually limiting so much creativity if we're just assuming this is for a technology team or, some software development teams. This can really empower business to unlock their own delivery of value, which was the whole goal behind Agile in the first place. How do we do more of that, right?
Rashina, you had another comment.
Oh, I was just going to say, I completely agree with what Chet was saying around the ethics of AI. So this is a big area of research for us. It is absolutely important, especially I feel as researchers, incredibly responsible to take a stance on asking the why when it comes to technology, rather than just the not, the why not, let's just do it. So ethics is super important. And I've got a PhD student at the moment, Asta Pant, and she's looking at ethics in AI. We're presenting it at the conference right now at Lisbon as well. So absolutely critical. And this is why I mentioned the human heart with the AI mind concept, which brings in the ethics, and we don't forget about it.
That's a good point. Angie, what do you see as some of the challenges of scaling agility, any of the technological endeavors that you have within Nike through a large organization? So scaling has become an issue in a lot of organizations, and they've approached it in different ways. How have you all approached the scaling issues at Nike?
So we approach it, we're broken up into regions. As I mentioned, I'm from one particular region. And I suppose a challenge that I've certainly seen in other organizations is assuming that one size fits all with your agile approach, right? So, it feels very neat in a company where it's really big and it's, matrixed, and there's a lot of different geographic regions to say, we're going to come in with this approach. We've adopted a particular scaling framework. We're going to roll it out across the board and everybody's going to adopt it and we're going to follow this playbook. But again, talking to a lot of what Rashina's been focusing on, when we do that, we take away that creativity that people need, especially if it's specific to a culture. And, like I said earlier, I come from South Africa. I'm living in the Netherlands now. I've been exposed to organizations in Europe and in the States and in Africa. And culturally, it's just so different. Focusing on one size fits all across the company because it feels really neat for someone in a portfolio position, that I think is a surefire way to fail with your delivery of initiatives. I think if you really kind of focus more on the guidelines, focus more on some shared principles, and then really share. So one thing that I do with my colleagues in our other geographic areas is we meet once a week and we share things that we are doing. And we say, we've tried this thing and we experimented here and it didn't quite work like we thought it would, but we learned this. And then they'll say, hey, I want to try that too. Can you send through what the work that you did? And we send it through and then they adapt it for their domain. And again, it's really leveraging each other's expertise. Whereas if you come in with a playbook and it's very rigid and everybody has to follow the same thing, it kind of dampens that creative spirit. And again, you do still need to synchronize. It's a large organization. There's ways we've got to come together. So there are things that are maybe going to have to be in place. And we always talk in my team, it's the corporate tax you pay, right? There's certain things you have to do because you've got to synchronize with other teams. But I think there's so much that we can do to really unlock people to think about things creatively. But if you lock it down too early, yeah, you just lose all of that value, right?
Right. That's why I like the terms accomplishments and dissatisfactions, because you can always learn. You should always learn. That the only way you have a failure is if you fail to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so a dissatisfaction is something to work on. And I've never been on a project that didn't have some accomplishments and didn't have some disappointments. And so you learn from both of those. I think it's time we got some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, you're listening in and you have a question, now's the time.
There are quite a few comments in the chat, Jim.
Oh, so I've got a.
So there's one question, I think it relates to one of the comments I made earlier where someone said, are you going to trust your business to use the black box that you don't understand how it works, right? So how do you trust the quality of decision making, and are you willing to bet your livelihood on it? And Rashina, I think you spoke about this a little bit earlier, right? Really the ethics behind it, understanding what you're training your AI models on. And again, I think there's so much to be said for training people to understand what you can and can't use AI for, right? So like I said earlier, if we're hoping that our business users can unlock their own delivery of value and not only have to rely on software engineers to do it, implies we've got to do a lot of training, right? We have to ensure people understand what AI is. What is it capable of? What is it not capable of? And what are some of the dangers there? Right, especially that ethical consideration. What I see happening, though, is a lot of companies just say, we don't trust people to use this, so we're just going to restrict it to a handful of people, right? And what you want to do is you want to unlock that, let people get creative with it, and also understand that it's not always going to give you great answers, right? There's a lot of things that you need to be quite critical with whatever you're asking ChatGPT, right? You need to still apply your human brain, and that's where the value of AI is. You keep saying it's that, that human side as well. It's when you bring the two together, people with AI, if you're then using it to spark creativity, that's a great combination, right? And from my perspective, that's, I think, how we really get some traction with AI. And that's not, like I said, not just in software development teams, that's empowering your business directly to use AI so that we can start lightening the load on software development teams as well, right? There's so much stuff for us to do, and we're always restricted by how many people we have access to do it. So,
can I just jump in there?
Go ahead, Rashina.
Sorry, Jim. I was just going to jump in there with the aspects around the trust in black box AI systems. So again, what Angie said for training and education, and this starts with the graduates that we're training right now in universities, and this is where we're focusing on teaching ethics. Again, presenting about this at the XE conference tomorrow, in fun ways, because one of the challenges as educators for us is teaching about ethics is like pulling teeth. It's so important. You need to do it. And cleaning teeth, you need to do it, but no one wants to do it. So how can we make it fun and a little bit more interesting and engaging? So we're experimenting with that in classrooms to get people on board. And then the training continues with the lifelong learning into industry. But the one other part of it that I wanted to bring up is when it comes to AI black box systems and all of the dangers that they pose, I think it's not just about individual practice and holding the individual developers accountable. Companies need to be accountable. And this is where it goes beyond ethics into laws. And right, so ethics are professional guidelines. They don't have you don't have a repercussion if you don't follow an ethical guideline. But if you don't follow the law, there is an ethical repercussion. And so companies will need to have, then we need laws that are governing the company behavior, and then the ethical guidelines to support that at the individual level. So I just wanted to sort of bring that up.
Let me
One of the
in there for a second on that, because what Rashina just said there is incredibly important and insightful. That we do a really poor job of integrating ethics into our daily business lives. I read an article, I think it was probably in The Economist a couple of years ago, about an attorney who was teaching a business ethics course at the University of Chicago. And one of the case studies involved the Ford Pinto debacle, where Ford saved $40 per car by not putting any steel in the back of the car, and just let the carpet in the trunk rest on top of the gas tank. And it turns out the professor who was discussing this was a lawyer at Ford and approved this. Because his job was to approve things that the business wanted to do, not to think about how many thousand people would die because of it. And so we have a tendency to get focused on the specific and not think about the global implications. Is this something that you would be proud you did? And
let me take another question here.
Yeah.
Agile folks, Rich says, Agile folks are bad with feedback and adapting. They love the playbook. So we've talked about that some in that we talk about feedback and adapting, but a lot of people don't do it. They just go by the playbook.
I wonder who these Agile folks are he's talking about.
I think it kind of comes to the difference between doing Agile and being Agile. And this is something I guess industry and academia all agree on. We know when there's a checklist, and we know when you can, tick it off. And yet there are companies that I visit, and I have talked to just about everybody from this, developers in the trenches up to the CEO. And sometimes they don't even mention the word Agile, but it's in their DNA and you know it. So I think these checklists and playbooks are all well and fine. It might be a very good place to start, but ultimately you have to put it as part of your cultural DNA to truly be Agile and not just be doing Agile.
Let me jump in here and reflect on what Rich was saying. My basic mindset has been for the past little bit in looking at things I see written, particularly on things like LinkedIn, about, is Agile dead? And my basic answer to that is, it doesn't matter if Agile's dead right now or not, but maybe we should kill it anyway. Maybe we've gone as far as we can down this path, and we're now generating more problems than we are solving. And perhaps we should roll back. I believe wholeheartedly that the pinnacle of Agile thought happened around the publication of the Agile Manifesto. And we have been in decline into what we might call the period of decadence within the Agile world. The ideas have stopped, and now we're just churning over the same ground over and over again. And maybe we should just go back to Deming and start again with all the things we've learned.
We got a lot more questions here. But Angie, let me ask if you've got a few words you'd like to say to kind of wrap up.
I'm gonna maybe focus specifically on what Chet just landed there, because otherwise it'll be like a mic drop moment. I think things are changing so much, right? I think what worked for us in the past, we're no longer solving the same problem, right? The problem that led to the creation of frameworks like Scrum, etc. Things have changed, right? Our organizations, that was never designed to work at scale. When Agile is prolific everywhere, all organizations have some element of agility in there. We need to rethink what does this look like going forward? And I agree with you. I think that there's a lot of things that we've lost. And I think a large part of that is that principles, right? Yes, we got very focused on framework stuff. Let's go back to what matters here, right? Like, still to this day, we're having conversations about the correct sprint length. Who cares what the correct sprint length? We know going forward that if you're still doing a 2-week iteration, when you know, in this day and age, that's probably too long. Right? We've now got a lot of tools that help us deliver value a lot faster. Let's rethink that kind of thing. And I don't think that's what we've got to yet. We haven't really looked at the practices that have just become so ingrained in what we do. It's almost like it's traditional Agile. And that's a weird thing to have in one sentence, right? We need to break that. What do we really need to rethink going forward? You know, and yeah, we've got to turn the whole way of working on its head, and it does need to go back to principles. And maybe those principles are a little bit different to the ones that we started with, just because it is just so different. The problem space is now very different to what it was 20, 25 years ago.
Rashina, do you have a couple of words?
I do actually. I do. Thank you. So I was just thinking, you know, as Angie was speaking, that when Agile came around with the manifesto, and you would know this better than anyone else, Jim, it was addressing some pain points, right? It was trying to fix something, improve something. And I think we need a long, hard look at what the pain points are now, because they're not the same. And then so start from the basics of what is the problem statement instead of running to the solution or even trying to fix a previous solution. What is the new problem statement? What are the issues now? And then I don't care if that solution statement is called Agile, Augmented Agile, Agile Prime, Fragile, whatever it is. We'll find some name for it, but we have to go back to what are the new problems that the industry is facing, and then kind of think about what we want to call it.
Right. Let me kind of wrap this up. Decades ago, Peter Drucker, who's kind of the father of modern management, provided us with a quote that is as valuable today as it was then. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. We hope today's session has provided you with ideas about cultural change that will assist you on your journey. For an in-depth discussion about these topics and more, attend our World Management Agility Forum, September 19th through the 21st in Lisbon, Portugal. You can see our conference website and for practical information about reimagining management. I want to thank Hugo and his staff for organizing this webinar, to online participants, and especially to Rashina, Chet, and Angie for their time and energy as panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.